Order up!
Welcome to Overproof. This week on the show, I am talking with Rachel Palumbo, aka Mrs. Mezcal. Rachel is one of the co-founders, alongside her husband, of Hey Palu over in Edinburgh. They have also founded another bar as well called Chancho, Agave. Chancho is unfortunately no longer operating, and we go through what that looked like and why that came about. Rachel's conversation was really honest. We look into the reality of when you have one really successful venue and one that's not been quite as successful, and what closing down a business actually looks like. She kept it pretty positive though, and I think that there are a lot of really valuable lessons to be learned from this episode. So, without further ado, let's jump in.
Order up!
Wow, 3 words. Crikey. Let me think about that. I would say the first 3 words I would say is exciting, exhausting, and adventurous.
Let's unpack that a little bit. So if we went back 7 years in time, before you opened a venue, do you think you would have picked the same 3 words?
No, I don't think so. I think, before you open anything, you have the, especially if it's your first venue, you've got the blessing of the not knowing what you don't know. So I think the enthusiasm and the hard work and the excitement is probably like the key kind of emotions that you feel during those initial stages when you're opening something. And it's not that goes away. I think the thing is once you've had your own venue, it changes dramatically because the landscape changes of maybe what you're doing. The initial ideas of what you thought your venue was going to be usually changes quite quickly within the first 6 to 12 months because you're constantly reassessing your kind of clientele that's coming through, the offering that you're doing. If you're like us, we had the benefit of opening 6 months when COVID hit. So having to see how you can save your business and pivot and all of these things. And I think probably that's even truer now. I think we're probably in a phase where it's even harder for hospitality. I was talking about this morning actually with my partner, saying I'm actually almost thankful that we opened when COVID hit because we had the benefit that people had money because they weren't going anywhere. And now I think it's much harder if you open something in the current climate because people don't have a lot of money that is in excess. And so they're really picking and choosing how they're spending that money, which can be fantastic if you're an independent bar or restaurant. But it also adds challenges to that as well.
For sure. So before Hey Palu existed, what role did Hospo play in your life?
So I'd say I've got one of these really unusual careers, I think, for hospitality, because a lot of people who are bar owners have always just done hospitality and that's always been their kind of main bread and butter. And with me, I started out in hospitality the end of the 90s, early 2000s. And my role when I started was restaurant managing. So I did that for a good few years. But at the time, because there was a lot of toxicity, especially as for a woman in the industry, I'd had enough and I burnt out quite rapidly. So by the time I was 25, I stopped away, had a complete hospitality shift to do something totally different, went into travel agency. And then from there, I took I'd say a 10-year hiatus, working in offices, getting lots of experience in lots of different roles. But actually, I always had hospitality as my side hustle. I don't think it ever really went away because once you've fallen in love with it, or sometimes it can be a slightly abusive relationship, it's always, for me, I always find it really hard to pick. So even if I was working, I worked full-time for a charity, maybe sort of office management, executive assistant role, and I always had my little side hustle of doing a hospitality event. There was any sort of little gig because I love the fact that you can make some extra money. And I always felt it was with much more like-minded people when I was back in hospitality environment, which I never really felt when I was in an office environment.
I have had a very similar relationship with hospitality. and I've ended up like, I came full circle and then fell back in love with it again, but I always kind of left and then I came back and then I left and then I came back. It always sucked me back in. Yeah. Relationship. That's a very good metaphor. What were you doing? Because I find this very interesting. You were in quite a different industry when you first opened Hey Palu.
Yeah, completely. So we moved up to Edinburgh in 2017, and then the site that Hey Palu is at came available in, I think, the July of 2019. And we signed the contract by the August. I was working for an oil and gas company as an executive assistant for the CEO. Ironically, Hey Palu is literally round the corner from my old job, or as I used to time it could take me 7 minutes. So if I was running from work to shift, or I needed to drop something off, I knew I could get it there and back within a timed break quite easily.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, it was a completely different role, but actually so much of the kind of administrative back of house, networking, relationship building that I learnt or kind of further developed within that role has been so helpful in helping with making Palu what it's become. And I will always say to people, get as much experience in all sorts of different industries, because you never know which tiny elements of those skills that you learn can be so helpful in your own business.
That's so true. Because you opened with your husband, right?
Yes. It was myself, my husband, and we also had a business partner as well.
Okay. Yeah, cool. How did you meet them?
So the business partner was a colleague of my partner, Alex, and they had worked together in an Edinburgh-based, they were like a restaurant group. So they both had experience within the kind of restaurant, Edinburgh scene. And at the time, it felt like it would be a great idea to have three of us come in. Also, financially, it made a lot of sense for us to bring in a third party just to create a more of a buffer for when we were first opening the business.
And how did you decide that opening a venue was the right next step for you guys?
I think for us, we talked about, so Alex and I had been kind of formulating Hey Palu for around 7 years. We've just found the other day, like one of our notebooks, it's got like loads of scribbled things of like menus, and yeah, we have this. And actually, when we were looking at it, it's not that dissimilar to what kind of the initial opening and some of the themes running through that notebook's still there. So it's quite nice to see that the foundations haven't actually changed, and you know they're pretty solid. More so for Alex, I think, than for myself. He was doing a lot of hospitality openings, so bars and restaurants, and it just kind of felt like it was the next thing for us to do, or him to do, definitely. And I don't know, I think because it's always been in my blood, like I've done it for such a long time from such an early age. It wasn't really a case of we must do it. It just felt like it was obviously the next thing for us to do. That and the fact we had like 20,000 notebooks by this point. So it was like the next
had to do something with them.
Yeah.
What was your like vision for Hey Palu when you first opened, and has that changed since then?
Sure. So I would say, like we're saying, the bones of it were definitely there, because what we wanted to create was a third space where you could go and get really great Negroni. It would have like a great neighborhood feel. We used to have a local pub that we used to go to when we lived in London, and it really encapsulated this really lovely neighborhood feeling. Everybody kind of knew everybody. Service was amazing in there. So customer service was like the number one thing on our list, but married with having like a really great drink, but without it having any of the kind of pretension that you sometimes get around more of a kind of like an Italian style bar. So there was those kind of key things we wanted to make sure that people would have. It needed to have great music, and just kind of that feeling that it's a wet Tuesday, but you want to go out and have a Negroni. You want to come to us for that. So that's definitely still there. I think what changed dramatically, and I'll find this and I'll send you a picture of it, was what was almost like a tomb of a menu that we created to begin with, because we didn't really know what the clientele would be like. And we thought at the time that we should offer lots of wines by the glass.
Oh, we did the
So we
same
probably
thing.
had around 30 wines by the glass. The menu's like really chunky. It's really wordy. It's actually really unapproachable when I look at it now. And it's quite obvious that it's the thing we did at the very last minute. We're in a bit of a panic. That's definitely changed. Like, I think what happened quite rapidly in the sort of 6 months that we were open, before we had to shut, was the fact that people weren't actually coming for wine. People were coming for cocktails. Over the 7 years, I would say now that the business is driven probably by 90% is cocktails, and then the 10% is food, and then you get a smattering of wine in between that. But really, the main kind of bread and butter now we are seen as a cocktail bar.
So the vision has just pivoted slightly. It hasn't changed. Like the hospitality ethos, everything else that you started with, do you think it's still the same?
Yeah, I would say I think it is the same. I think for us, probably the main thing that changed, or it kind of, more than anything, it's how it felt so post-COVID, we may or may not touch on COVID, but during that period of time, we decided that it actually wasn't financially viable for us to have three of us in the business. And even if the business was going to be a success, that would be really challenging moving forward. I was still working full time at this point, and the plan had always been that at some point I would be able to come out of my full-time job to then go into the business full-time. And we knew that if there was still going to be three directors, that probably wasn't going to be an opportunity, and we weren't making enough money to do that, which was basically what sort of drove the conversation around us buying our business partner out, because we knew that it wouldn't be long-term a good financial solution for anybody involved. So that's what drew that. And I think from that point onwards, I think it got tighter in our vision because it was just Alex and myself, and it probably, if anything, peeled back down to the foundation of what we had in the original notebooks, because we can make those decisions much quicker because it was just the two of us.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I know quite a few people that have gone into business with more than two directors or more than two shareholders in a smaller style venue, and it's just not enough for everyone to be like actively involved in the business, because it doesn't generate in a smaller size venue enough profit for it to be worth like having 4 or 5 shareholders in a business, or even 3 maybe, like in your case.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just means that I think those conversations that can potentially be like quick fire become quite prolonged, because if two of you are agreeing on, say, glassware, and the third person doesn't like that glassware, every conversation then becomes then this whole different thing that you're having to negotiate the whole time. And that in itself becomes really exhausting, because you very rapidly lose the kind of the impetus and the enthusiasm and all the really positive energy, because you're quibbling over the saucer and the price of the saucer, because that's where it's going. So once that was removed from the situation, it made it much easier for us, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And you can just go all in with what you both want to do. Are you guys you two usually on the same page, or do you... That would be no. How do you solve like being in a relationship and having conflict when you have a business together and you obviously are doing life together on top of that as well?
For me, I'd say it's been quite challenging. I think Alex would probably agree with that. We're both really strong personalities, and we both have quite fixed ideas on stuff. I would say where we are really great working as a team is actually when you have like crisis, or you need something done really quickly. We're really good at rapid turnaround with things like that. So COVID was really good for us, oddly. Yeah. And I think, if anything, we really pulled together then. I think where it becomes more challenging is when we're trying to get better. I would say, right, you do that bit, I do that bit. But I mean, we probably have more conversations on things than need to be had, because we're never quite either one of us going to let the other person have the last word. But we're trying to get better at it. It's a work in progress.
I hear you. Sorry, what do you mean? How do you think that COVID was good for you?
I think for us, the reason it worked really well is because at that kind of pinch point, we were both very focused on what needed to happen. Like, all of our investment and money and savings was in the business. So for us, there was no option for it to fail. Like, we had to make it work, because if we didn't make it work, the money that we'd spent a long time like putting together and saving, and because we didn't have any sort of financial investors, it was just us. I think that's what really drove us to work really well together. Also, I think because we had the sort of the added benefit, the fact I was still working full time, it did take off some of the financial pressure, because we knew that we had like solid income coming in. When we set up the business, Alex had baked into like the forecasting. What if no one comes to the door for 6 months? And lo and behold, that's what happened. So I think, I don't know, I think that and our ability to kind of pivot and say, right, doors are shut. What can we do to make this work? Let's do takeaway cocktails. How do we do that? Right, you find out that. You find out that. And then when I was working, he would be down in the bar, batching drinks, putting them into backpack bags. And then together we'd be selling them on the weekends, like from the patch, from the, distance and all the rest of it. And I think because we could see the business like growing within that kind of dynamic and in that environment, we were just very much on the same page with where we needed it to get to, because, failure wasn't an option for us.
That's interesting. Some people do really well under pressure, but it's interesting that both of you do really, really well under pressure. Sink or swim. You quickly touched on how you finance the business. So did you take on any debt to finance the business to start?
Yeah.
Or was that all from savings?
So we had a combination, basically. So we had some investment, well, a very small investment from our family. It was a loan. We had some savings, and then we also took a bank loan as well. So for us, there was, although the family investment was there, we knew the pressure would be off us for that as to when we paid that back. But around the bank loan we had, that had very specific terms. So we knew every month we had to be paying back a certain amount for a fixed period of time. So that's where kind of having my job was helpful, because at least we knew that we'd be able to pay it monthly without having to worry so much about the business having to provide for that.
Did you have a house that you secured the loan against, or was it based on just like the business plan?
It was just like a personal loan that we took. So we kind of saw how much money we might be able to take, and then factor that into the budget, and then basically bootstrapped pretty much to be able to open.
Oh, well done. That's not an easy feat. The venue that you went into, was it an existing hospitality site?
Yeah, so the venue that we took on, it was actually the site that Alex came up to Edinburgh to help design, was working in for a very short period of time until he was no longer working due to, I'd say, creative differences with the owner. So we were really lucky. So it meant like all of the back bar Alex had actually designed. So it was already to his complete specification. I mean, it's such a rare unicorn of a site that we got. I don't know that happens very often. But so for us, when we took it on, because they'd not been that busy or really busy at all, it meant that everything was in pretty good condition of what we had within the building itself. It was completely filthy dirty. So that was one thing that took a considerable amount of time to do, because it looked like in the 6 months they'd never cleaned it once. It was pretty revolting. But more kind of for us, it was around like the fixtures and fittings, getting the feel right, music, all of those kind of things, and how that sort of worked within the venue. That I think, and I wouldn't say it took us so long, because we had these really clear ideas as to what we wanted to look like anyway. We just kind of managed to adapt it and fit it in. I'm pretty good on finding things on eBay and various different sites. So like the chairs we've got in the venue, they're secondhand off eBay. They're from the 70s. We just got them reupholstered. Thankfully, touch wood, they're still going 7 years on. And I think because we had that sort of visual of what we felt it should feel and look like, it was quite easy to kind of get that to fit within the venue, because it's quite industrial looking on one kind of side of it. But I think we've managed to merge the industrial with the idea of it feeling quite family, local, and neighborhood Italian kind of vibes.
What do you think the best item that you got in the venue was? Like money worth spending on that one thing?
I would say ice machine. Don't skimp on an ice machine. Get yourself a Hoshizaki, because it makes such a difference. Yeah.
And the worst money?
I guess I would just say just generally like really cheap equipment, because you burn through it and then you just keep having to replace it the whole time. I'm trying to think what else we spent a lot of money on initially that we've either like never used, or I think there's probably been things that we've just given away and pretend that they never existed. There's definitely been stuff that we've bought that we're like, why did we spend the money on that? Has been passed to other venues or other people we know to enjoy.
I feel you there. We might have done the same. How was that first year of business? So a lot happened in the first year, right?
Yeah, a lot happened. I don't know. I think it was, you just couldn't plan for anything. And it was like nothing you ever would have expected. And I think especially more so from Alex's perspective, because by the time we'd gotten round, or he had gotten round to opening Hey Palu, it was his 13th opening. So, you know, the normal format would be you find the site, you do all the builds or whatever needs doing, you open the doors, you hopefully get customers through, and then you watch it grow. And instead for us, I would say it was quite a slow start. Where we were was not a destination at all. We're in a fairly salubrious area of Edinburgh known to everyone as the Pubic Triangle, because we're down the road from 3 strip clubs. So unless you're specifically going for that, people didn't used to come really in that area. That area's changed quite a bit now, because I'd say there's more independent coffee shops. It's gotten a lot busier with people. We've now become a destination bar, but at the time, that definitely wasn't the case. So it was definitely a slow start. I would say so we opened in September. By the February, we were starting to see a real like sign of pickup, which was great. So having good Saturdays. Week was slow, but it was getting busier. And then COVID hit in the March. And you went from that to just... And then in Scotland, because we had such crazy rules and we were open and close, I think at one point we worked out that we'd put more drinks into backpack bags than we'd actually served in glassware in the building. So it was wild. Like, I can't quite imagine that we went through it now, because it just seems so completely outlandish and ridiculous. But wearing your masks in the bar, at one point we weren't allowed to have music in Scotland. So
wait, what? You weren't allowed music? Why?
We weren't allowed music. There was this,
what do you mean?
This very bizarre thought that if you had loud music on, people shouted. So it spread more germs, but it actually worked in the opposite, because what you'd find was if there was no music, people got closer together because they didn't want to feel that they were being loud. So it created this really uncomfortable environment, to the point that I think we ended up playing in the background, just like, but you could get on, I think, Spotify or wherever, bar noises or restaurant background noise, just to like white noise it out so it wasn't completely sterile. So that was like, that was hideous when that was happening. That was really, really unfun. And it felt like hard work, and you would close early. Yeah, it was really strange up here. It was really odd.
I did not know about that rule. That is who came up with that? That's so stupid. Post-COVID, so when everything opened up again, did you see a big surge of spending?
Yes, we did. So for us, I think where we had the benefit of COVID was in the fact, because we were doing the takeaway cocktails, and we did them probably a month after everybody closed. So we were one of the first. There's a couple of companies, but there weren't very many that were actually doing it in Edinburgh. And it just really grew our brand presence online, which was amazing. So when we were able to open, people were really keen to actually come into the venue and have a cocktail, because they only had experienced it through like the delivery service, or they'd come to the bar and collected it, but they'd never actually stepped foot in it. I think also just definitely within the UK, but in Scotland in particular, people were so keen to be out and go back and support local business. It was amazing. So from that point onwards, the trajectory, which you hope your business is going to do by just increasing week on week, happened. And it meant we could get a new staff member. Yeah, we really saw the business change quite dramatically, I would say. like after COVID sort of completely finished up. So yeah, it was amazing for us.
How many did you have staff before COVID?
It was the three of us, and then we did have a full-timer as well who we ended up having to make redundant. And then when we reopened, it was just myself and Alex, and it was us for a little while. We get some friends doing like some disco shifts, and then we decided that we needed to have a full-timer because I was then sort of back in the office and I wasn't as available.
But you were still working.
Yeah, I was still working. Nothing beats the 7-day week. After that, we had one full-timer, and then we had some people doing like, again, some more disco shifts on weekends. And then I think probably into the second proper year was when we then had then another full-timer, and then it just sort of grew from that. And now we have 5 full-time plus myself and Alex.
Wow, nice. What's the capacity?
So I would say we're around 35.
Quite
35 to 45, depending on how many people want to squeeze together around the table. You know, it's not the biggest.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to open a second venue?
So I would say we opened Chancho in 2024. We'd probably been actively looking for a good year and a half before that, but we couldn't quite find the right venue. We were looking at a lot of different pubs, sort of independent sites, and nothing had quite the right feel for us. So the site where Chancho was, we'd known about like previously, and we'd missed out when it had come up for availability, I think maybe the year before. It went back on the market, and at that point, it just felt like the right time for us to get a new challenge, do something completely different, be in a different area, and just kind of go for it.
At this point, you'd had quite a bit of success at Hey Palu.
Yeah, absolutely. So by this point, we'd won a Class Bar Award. I think we were sitting at number 5 in the UK top 50 list, which was amazing. We'd won like some national awards for Scotland. They have like the Dram Award up here and SLNTN awards as well. Too many letters. Yeah, for us, we wanted that new challenge, and we wanted to see what else we could do. I'd also been made redundant at that point from my job, so it felt like it was the right time to do something new. I was in a business full time, and we just wanted to go for it.
What did your roles look like within the business when you were planning out that second site?
So for us, I would say we very much probably mirrored how we did the planning for Hey Palu. So I am always more of the like back of house side of things. And then for Alex, he's more around contracts, drink development, the more creative side of things. So I would say, mostly it was pretty much the same way. But maybe the only slight difference within this was then how we looked at which products we were going to be stocking, just because Agave is more my area, and I would say for Alex, Amara is more his area. So it was more the kind of products that I thought would be exciting and interesting to have in the menu, as opposed to even kind of leading that element of it.
Yeah. And before we get too much into this, actually, I just want to bring up, you have a sommelier of Mezcal, right?
Yes. Yeah, I qualified last year in that.
Which is something that I didn't know, like I don't know much about at all. So what do you have to do to get that qualification?
So the qualification is run by a company. They're based out in the States called, or USA. They're the Agave Spirits Institute. You can basically do up to 4 courses. So very similar kind of formatting that you would have in a WSET, but it's all done online. So you get this great little tasting kit. It's pretty intensive because you do it over a 2-day intensive course, and then you sit the exam like as and when you feel that you're ready to sit it. But I think it's one of those courses, I think like with anything within hospitality, once you get a qualification, it doesn't really stop there. It's a starting point, because from then on, it's down to you to develop your palate out, develop your tasting, really find like what you find as the flavor profiles that you really like, and then how you start to identify it. Especially because I think with anything within the sort of sommelier world, taste is so subjective and it's such a personal thing. getting the qualification really is the start of the journey as opposed to the end of it. So
Yeah.
I feel although I've got the qualification, I'm still very much in development as opposed to an expert on any forms of that at all.
I think the problem is the more that you learn, the more you realize you don't know as well. So that would have, did you get that because you were opening an agave bar, or it just happened to coincide in sort of timing?
I've heard about it, and then I felt that it'd be really helpful because we were doing tasting flights within the bar to be able to make sure that I could train my staff properly. I was also aware nobody really has that qualification in Scotland, as far as I'm aware. And because it's still quite a new institute that's out there, it just meant that I would be slightly ahead of the game with my knowledge and would feel more confident when I was talking to customers as well, especially because the way that we had the bar set up, we would be constantly changing the back bar of bottles. So it was never, the idea was that whenever you came in, you could always try something different, as opposed to it being that you had, say, 50 bottles, they're always there on the back bar, maybe some of them collecting dust. This way, it meant it was more exciting for people to be like, oh, I remember you had that one before, but what's that one? Or did you have something similar to the one I had last time? And it just meant you could have these really great conversations with people about what they liked, what you found exciting. So for me, that was like the impetus behind it.
And is it easy to source agave spirits in Edinburgh? Because I know, like in Australia, for example, there's a couple of agave bars and they actually just get people to kind of like smuggle the agave, like the mezcal or the tequila, back in suitcases.
I would say it's definitely getting better than it was. So, for example, probably when we opened Hey Palu, I think what you could get was really quite small within the product range. It's definitely growing because I think as the market grows within the UK and people are getting, definitely I was saying more on like the tequila side. I think with Mezcal, you have some key brands that you can get the full range of, but the more interesting and exciting things, you probably need still people to be smuggling them in for you.
And with this bar, how did you fund the opening of that? Was that through Hey Palu?
Yes. So we ring-fenced a pocket of money that we knew that we'd want to use for investments, but it's very separate from Hey Palu in the setup. We wanted to make sure that they were separate companies. So, if anything happened to either one of them, it didn't then cause any problems further down the line, which I think is always probably, if you can, the most sensible thing to do because you're protecting both entities.
I've just talked to someone earlier this week who didn't do that, and so their second bar, which unfortunately went under, also then ended up taking down their first bar as well.
Wow.
So I think that's very, very good advice. Are you happy to talk about when the cracks started to show, like how that experience was with that second bar?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you open anywhere, you're always hoping for the accolades and the positivity and the people. And I think for us, where it was, I don't know, unsettling is the right word. We started off great and it was received really well and it felt really positive for us. And I think that the combination of location, maybe us not having done as in-depth due diligence as we might have done if it had been the first bar, I think you have a kind of a level of comfortableness when you're opening something second, because you already think, I already know what I didn't know before, but actually there's a whole host of new things that you also don't know, especially for us because with Hey Palu it's independent. It's just, we rent it off a landlord. With Chancho, this was done through a brewery, so it had a very different dynamic from the get-go. It had quite a lot of problems from the get-go as well, which I think for both of us, we were just, me especially, because I'm probably the more positive out of the two of us, maybe ignored or just, I don't even know if it wasn't being realistic about it, because I'm a fairly realistic person, but I think because we put so much energy and effort and money into it, you just want to see that it's going to succeed. So where you have initial problems, you just think, oh, well, they're teething problems, and then that's fine. And then I think mirroring at the same time, when we started to see it get less busy, was around the time food and drinks getting very expensive. they had changed a lot of the taxation in the UK. So it meant that things like national insurance that you have to pay had gone up. Minimum wage had also gone up. And people really were starting to be a lot more careful with their spend, especially in the area that it was. It's a very pub-focused area down in Leith. And although there was the initial excitement of having a cocktail bar down there, I think, like anything, sometimes you can be at the right peak of the zeitgeist and sometimes you can be too early. And I think it's a little bit of a combination of being too early with the idea that people wanted something that was driven just by one specific spirit area, and also the location being around pubs. There was a lot of people in that area that are of kind of first-time buyers, which on paper looks great, but in reality means they don't have any money because all their money's in their property. So I think the combination of all of those things, you slowly start to see like business ebb. And it's during those moments where you're trying to not feel quite depressed that actually on a Wednesday, you're really not having very many people walk through the door and you've got a staff member there who you're responsible for paying their rent effectively. I think the energy becomes overwhelmingly exhausting because you're constantly trying to be quite buoyant about the business because you don't want your staff member to worry about their income whilst you're actually worrying about the business's income.
That's very true. And at what point did you have to cut hours or make the call on the business? Because now the business is shut. Like, how did you get to the point where you made that decision?
I think over the summer period, we'd had, because in Edinburgh in August you have the Arts Festival, the Fringe Festival, which is comedy and music, and it runs for the whole of August. And it brings hundreds of thousands of people to the city. And it's an amazing opportunity for businesses that are within the centre. So for us at Hey Palu, it's fantastic. What it really highlighted, though, for us within August was just how quiet Leith was. And there was nobody coming down there. And you really start to assess, like, is it going to always be like this? And it felt, because we were in the second year of having done an August, that it wasn't feeling very positive. And so we started having the kind of conversations around what would we do? Would we carry on with it? When we signed our lease, we managed to bake into the contract that we would have a 3-month notice period in case we did want to leave. So we had to negotiate quite hard for that. But I'm so thankful that we did do that. During this period when it was quieter, Alex and I were very keen to make sure, because up until that point, either he or myself had been on shift with our staff. We basically took a back seat from being on site so much because we didn't want to cut hours for our staff. We didn't want them to not. I think it's nothing worse than you start in a job, you get told you're going to be, 40 hours, and then suddenly it's 35, and then suddenly it's 30, because you've got bills to pay. And we felt very responsible for the fact that we had employed these people, and it's not down to them how the business is running. That's down to us. It's our responsibility. Also, it's environmental as well, and what's going on, like, from a socioeconomic perspective. But we wanted to make sure that they were okay. So by the time it got to September, we started having conversations with our accountant to do some forecasting. We spoke to the brewery around the fact that it wasn't feeling super positive for us in the area. We had some good discussion points. We had an inkling that it just wasn't going in the right direction for what we wanted it to do. We weren't losing money. We weren't, like, week on week seeing that rise that you want to be seeing in your bank account. And I think that it's that point of, when do you leave the party? You don't want to be the last person standing. And it really felt like that for us. It's like, we can either get out now or start to really think about that, or we leave it another 6 months, see what happens. But by that point, that could start to be really detrimental to the financial side of it. So by the end of September, from what the accountant showed us with the forecasting and our sort of gut feeling on it, it just felt like it was the right time to call it quits on the business.
How was that for you guys mentally? Because you've had one like very successful venue, and then to open a second, like how was that for you?
I would say because during the months, like the summer months, I'd been there pretty much full time. I had already had that sort of in my shell sinking feeling happening within me. So I think by the time we got to October and then by the time we actually closed till December, I felt more positive than anything because it definitely felt like we were doing the right thing. I think in those sort of mid-months, when you're in that flux and you don't know what you should be doing, you've tried everything, speak to local businesses, you're trying different sorts of advertising and nothing's sticking. That's really, really hard. And I think because you want to succeed and you keep pushing forward and nothing's working, you do start to really doubt yourself. And I think I would say sort of August time, I was really feeling burnt out by all of it because we just weren't seeing the results that we wanted. And it just wasn't going in the direction we hoped for. We knew that the product was really great, the bar looked really beautiful. And then you're looking around and on a Saturday, you're not absolutely like full to the rafters. It's so despondent. And I think it's really hard to, you just have to keep going with it because you can't, I think it's really important to not make the staff worry about their position within the business. Like you have to shoulder quite a lot of that. Probably also help that I was surrounded by Mezcal. On occasion that might have helped as well.
Yeah, of course. And how did your staff handle it when you let them know? Difficult conversation?
Because
I
mean, they understood because obviously they could see that they'd been working and it hadn't been busy. So we were able to give them like a month's notice. It was unfortunate that we closed before Christmas because obviously that's a really shitty time to know that people are out there looking for jobs. The great thing for us is at least we know enough people in the industry. We could at least put feelers out to say we've got these great guys and they would know that they've been trained well. And also you've got two agave experts also now in Edinburgh, which a lot of bars didn't maybe have access to. But yeah, they were real champions about it and they're right to the very end and helped us break it all down. But it was, I think, from a more kind of like business perspective, it was just exhausting. But yeah, I would say, I don't know, maybe ask them how they felt about it. Maybe I'm a bit rose tinted and they're like, bastards, blah, blah, blah.
And how did you feel once you've made that call? Do you feel like it has been a load off or do you feel like it's still going?
I would say it's 95% feeling like a load off now. And it's definitely for myself giving me more headspace to be able to start thinking about how I want to now like adapt my knowledge on agave, where the opportunities lie to work with some brands, do some tastings myself. So from that perspective, it feels really exciting. And especially because like starting the new year without having the stress of, I think January would have been incredibly stressful if we'd still been open. Just knowing how Edinburgh's been quite quiet this January anyway, that's been a huge relief. What I have learned from this whole kind of process is the fact that closing a business is as stressful and frustrating as opening one. So it's definitely given me, let's say, the opportunity to like tighten up some SOPs around opening and shutting utility companies and lots of all those extra really boring bits of admin that you didn't maybe know about before that I'm now very well versed in.
I think every time I've talked to you, you've been like, I've been on the phone to the utility company.
Yeah, and it's still going.
Can you tell me a bit about what it's like to close a business? Because I haven't heard that from anybody else yet. So what is involved when you're closing a business?
Yeah, I would say that the majority of the things really when you're closing are the sort of the key administrative elements that you'd have when you're opening a business. Your accountant's going to be dealing with closing down the tax element of it, which will be the thing that takes the longest to close out, just because the process that they have dealing with, like in the UK, it's HMRC, but whoever like your main governing tax body is, wherever you are, that bit takes a while. Things like your water, your maybe business rates, electricity, broadband, all of those things, I'd say to somebody, make sure you give yourself at least 45 days notice period with that for them, because some companies need it, some companies don't. And I think what that's really highlighted for me is making sure that you have that information when you're opening an account, when you're opening your business, because you hope you don't ever need to have that information. But knowing that I didn't have that information and trying to find it just means that whole closing out process can be massively prolonged and painful, which it probably doesn't need to be. It's always going to be complicated, I think, anyway, speaking with utility companies, just because of how by nature they're set up with the customer service and call centers and everything. But I think you can probably reduce the pain points by just having those sort of bits of information noted down somewhere. So I'd say from the administrative side, that's the key things. Obviously closing down your website, Google Maps, all of those kind of things are like key, boring administrative tasks that are really important to get done. And then for us, I mean, we've been quite fortunate because all of the things like glassware, we have somewhere for that to go live. So that will now live in Hey Palu. Stock, fortunately, on the last day, the majority of the customers drank most of it. So there wasn't really anything to dig in. I set out other things spotted. And then things like furniture and like your general sort of like fixtures and fittings. There's actually a new company that's already taken over the site. So they've already bought those bits from us. So that's been really helpful for us as well. Otherwise, we were looking at how we get rid of like the tables and chairs. In the UK, if you donate it to charity, you get that off. It can be seen as benefit towards your tax bills. That's a really positive thing to do. Because if you're selling something and you're a VAT registered business, you're supposedly also charged the VAT. So it can actually become quite complicated getting rid of things. It's not as straightforward as just like on Gumtree or Facebook. Like really need to have some kind of thing around considering. And then, you know, you have a business bank, you're going to close that out. But all of those things kind of have like a domino effect of the utilities closed down. Then you make sure that everything's signed and handed over back to either the landlord or the brewery or whoever. I would say take photographs of everything. Take photographs of like meter reads and paperwork. And I think when you're going into your venue to begin with, make sure you have a really amazing schedule of conditions. So how the venue looked to begin with, because what a lot of people don't realise is when they're handing back a business, especially in the UK, you have something called a schedule of dilapidations, where a surveyor will come in and look at then the state of how the business is you're leaving it in, and you can end up with a really massive bill if it's not in good order when you're handing it back. So having all that paperwork in place to be able to say, no, this is exactly the same as it was when we took it on, is really essential.
Yeah, that's really good information to have. If you had like one piece of advice, you've had two very different journeys with two different businesses now. If you had one piece of advice to give people who are looking to open a bar future, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say it's really thinking about your why, like why you want to open a bar or a restaurant, because if it's to make money, you won't. Because you want to be creative, that will be such a small part of your day-to-day running. You really have to think about what is that driving force behind why you want to open your business. If it's for the fact of, like with Alex and myself, it just was what we always meant to be doing, and we felt very driven that it was the next step for us. That's where our why really kind of was. But I think you really have to go into it with excitement and enthusiasm, but maybe with the blinkers off as well, because a lot of your time as a business owner, which you all know yourself, is doing some really unsexy things. I know a lot more about like urinal filters than I ever wished I would hope to know. But that information in there now. So there's a lot more sort of hands-off creativity side to it than I think making people realize.
Yeah. I think a lot of people get into like venue ownership for the idea of like it'll be your bar so you can do whatever you want, but most of the time when you do own a venue, you don't actually do the running of the bar. You do all the stuff that you got into hospitality to avoid at a desk job.
Yeah.
or like the maintenance, or you figure out how to change a tap on a sink, or like all of the stuff that isn't really like typical hospitality day to day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because you kind of know that, and obviously there is still a bit flipping with saying you won't make any money. You can make money, but it's a really hard industry to be in these days as well. And if money's your driving force, then it's not the right reason to do it, because you've got to love customer service. You've got to love people. You've got to know that people are difficult, and just because you really love a Negroni, 100 people aren't all going to love that Negroni. If you're really lucky, 80 of those people are going to love it, and 20% of those people are going to think it's absolutely hideous. As long as you're really focused on what you're doing and know that you're not going to please everybody, I think that's where kind of success lies in being really great at where you know your strengths are, and keeping that really tight. Because I think as soon as you're trying to step outside of that and thinking, let's try this and let's try that, it really starts to dilute what your brand's about. So that's also really important in that whole kind of why factor, like, who are you? Why are you doing this? What's it make people feel when they come in? How does it feel for you? All of those kind of experiences, really putting yourself in the customer's like perspective and viewpoint, I think really helps when you're establishing all of those factors.
With the customers that you say that not everybody's happy, were you good at taking the feedback on? How did you process that?
I would say for us, we are really, really lucky at Hey Palu. Just gonna touch some wood, but I would
I'll
say
touch some here for you too.
yeah, we have amazing guests. They're all, I would say 99% of our guests are phenomenal. They absolutely love the bar. They get the vibe. They get what we're about. They have a great time. They write beautiful reviews. They bother to take time to do that. And I think, unfortunately, you will always get that one person that maybe doesn't like something, or maybe has a pre-existing idea of what the bar is going to be or what their experience is going to be. And sometimes in that experience, you can fix it, and sometimes you just can't. And I think taking on board feedback is really valuable in the right circumstances, because I think if you feel really confident and you know what your business is and you know what your brand is, if someone was complaining because we didn't have a specific spirit in a mixer, I can't think of a particular example, but there was something that we don't have that they wanted, we're probably not the right venue for them. And that's also okay. And I think sometimes that's also okay to say to people, depending on how it's worded. My partner's more kind of direct with these things because he's Italian. I'm more
I feel
English
you.
about it.
So was mine. So
You can't please everybody. And if someone's after a pint, we'll say there's a pub down the road, they're fantastic, go to that, because you can't get a pint in our bar. So you can be annoyed about the fact that you can't get a pint, or you can go down the road and get a pint. So it's up to you. Like, it depends on.
Yeah, seems pretty straightforward, right? Do you have like a career highlight or a highlight?
I would say probably a highlight for us was definitely when we first won our class bar award. That was for us, that was really important. It really felt that we'd kind of like arrived within the hospitality scene. So that was definitely a highlight. I'd like to think that more highlights are coming, but it's ever evolving, let's say.
Yep.
Ask me next year.
Do you have a low light?
I would say probably the day we shut the bar when it was COVID. That was probably the most depressing day I've ever experienced, where you're discussing everything, not knowing like whether or not you're ever going to open the doors again. That felt pretty bleak.
Yeah, of course. Oh, well, look at you now. It's great. Well done. If somebody is coming to Edinburgh, what is a dish or a drink that they have to try?
I would say if you're coming to our venue, you have to have a Negroni. I would say you have to go up the road to the local bakery, Tasty Buns, because Louise makes them unbelievably incredible, delicious things to enjoy. And she's also one of our regulars. She's just a wonderful human. I think food-wise, they have like a couple of food markets that happen within Edinburgh on like Saturdays and Sundays. if you can find the guys that have the sausage roll stands, they have some amazing sausage rolls. So for me, that is a massive highlight. Like, it's really interesting.
And then do you have one time that you have been like the most in the weeds?
Yes. Yes. So after we found out that we were like number 5 in the UK of the top 50 awards, I'm going to put mostly the blame on Alex, but I did also agree to it. So it probably is 50-50. We stupidly decided that it'd be great to celebrate by offering a £5 menu for the day on a Sunday. And we hadn't really thought through how busy it would be. And we also hadn't really staffed to the fact that it could be really quite busy. So it was just me and him that worked it. It was probably one of the hardest, maybe the hardest shift I've ever worked in the 25 plus years of hospitality. That was because people just kept coming, which was amazing. Yeah, we were so in the weeds trying to get glasses done. By the end of it, we were broken. We sat on the bar. I think I grabbed a bottle of Patron from the back bar and was like, I'm not moving until this bottle's drunk. We are not cleaning this today. I just felt really traumatized.
That is a good deal. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it was a great night, but it was really, really hard. It's that moment you turn around and you can't catch up with anything. And the anxiety is about 5,000%. It was definitely
I love it. That's so good. Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that we should have talked about?
If you're thinking about opening something and you're still kind of like in the earlier part maybe of your career, get as much experience in different venues as possible. I think sometimes people feel pressured that they've hit a certain age and they should be achieving more, or they see like maybe their peers opening something and they feel that they should be in that place doing that. And I really think the way you develop is by having worked in lots of different types of venues. So small independents, maybe larger corporate ones, chains, because all of these things give you a base with different type of clientele and how to deal with those different types of clientele. Then when they walk through your actual door, it just means you feel comfortable straight away with knowing how to address somebody, how you can give really like top customer service without it maybe feeling like pressured or overwhelming or any of those things. So I think that is something I would definitely say to somebody. And I think if you are already opening, you're already open and you're struggling, I think it's always really good to speak to your peers to find out how they're doing as well, because I think sometimes there's this kind of, I don't know, misnomer around businesses not doing well, that if you close, you've failed. And that absolutely isn't the case. I think it depends on, it's quite personal as to what you take away from it. But in the grand scheme of things, if you look at like very large chain restaurants, they open and close all the time. And it's not seen really as anything at all. Whereas I think people put more pressure on themselves. If one venue that you've done hasn't worked in the way that you wanted to, it's a big failure. It's not. So I think speaking to other peers about it, and also knowing that if you do decide to cut your losses early, it's not a bad thing, because all it's doing is then opening up space for other opportunities. Because once you've got that pressure happening and you don't have that headspace to be able to look at other things, it really compounds that feeling of, what to do next. We're failing, things aren't going well. And whereas when you can step back from it, you can see actually it might not be as bad as you think it is. Or if it is time to close, then, you're maybe making the right decision for yourself then, because say that particular idea didn't work in that formulation then, doesn't mean you can't rework it and do it somewhere else and it'd be a success later.
I think that is beautiful advice, and it's a really good note to finish on. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, me too.
It sounds like you're a very, very busy person.
Well, so are you. It's been an absolute pleasure.